Mr. Katz? Avram Katz? Mr. Lebovitz? Mr. Lebovitz? Mr. Michelli?
I know he's
Yeah,
here.
I'm here.
Rabbi Niederman? Ms. Nieves?
Here.
Mr. Sofa? Mr. Sofa? Mr. Solano? Mr. Vega?
Here.
Okay. Mr. Weidberg?
They say the money is secure.
Oh, Rabbi Niederman?
I hear Rabbi Niederman.
Hello.
Hello.
Yes, you hear me?
Yep.
That's good.
Mr. Weidberg? I see him, but he's not
I know he's
answering.
here. I see him.
Today I have to admit, getting connected was easier than the last meeting. I don't remember what meeting. I had such difficult connecting.
Mr. Weiser?
Here.
Okay. Mr. Weidberg's here. Mr. Berger? Mr. Berger? Mr. Canton?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, where are you?
Corey. It's Corey
Next.
Canton.
Oh, Corey. Okay.
Hey.
Yeah.
Miss Lee? Miss Nabotowski? Okay, I guess you have
I'm
enough
here.
to start with.
Yeah,
Who said that?
Katie said that.
Okay.
Okay, great.
You have enough for the land use.
Okay, doke. Do you want to check the housing? We could start with just the first land use item unless you want to do the housing also.
Okay, so we have Miss Fiera's already present. Rabbi Needham is present. Iris Cabrera? Iris? She's not answering. Miss Drinkwater is present. Miss Foster? Mr. Goldstein?
Foster wrote in the chat that for some reason she has no volume or speaker, no sound, but she's writing in the chat.
Okay.
Mr. Gross?
I know he's here. He said we heard him.
I see him. Yes. Do you have microphone? Mr. Gross?
Hello?
Yes, okay.
You hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you. Mr. Landale? Hello? Mr. Needleman? Peterson? Dana Racklin? And Miss Lee, she's not here. Oh, you have enough. Okay. I don't know who's calling here. Let me find out. Okay.
Encouraging people to send people to us, or but I think we just gotta be creative.
All right, so let's get started. And so we did also invite our two council members or their representatives. And I see that Alexis is here from Council Member Reynoso's office, and we also invited Richard Barrick, who is here. I don't know if anyone is here from Councilmember Levin's office.
I have to just chime in here and say, Del, this is such an important topic. I'm not sure that the council offices were reached out to.
I personally spoke
You did.
to Ben.
Okay.
And told him, that we were hoping that somebody from the office would come. He
And I'm
was
sure,
one.
right, what about,
Steve Levin confirmed.
okay, well, and what about Asher? Because sorry, Alexis, don't mean to, you're from that office, I know, but it was spoken about Asher last time coming. Was he reached out to, do you know? I just need to ask because he had so much to do, I think, with Levin's office with the,
Yes, Asher knew about it, but he's busy today, so he cannot make it today.
okay.
But we've been
Okay.
talking about that internally in the office.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, no offense, no, I'm not offended. He's the urban planner.
I can tell you that in addition to the office reaching out to our council members, I personally reached out to people too. And I know that Ben said that he could not make it this evening, and he didn't know about Steve Levin. So I agree this is really important, and I agree that that Council Member Levin's office is an important participant. So moving right along, let's get started. And I know that Evergreen also, we reached out to Evergreen, and I know that you're here too. There you go. Thank you. So I think, we will get started. And Karen, I will also be relying on you a good deal tonight. I know I already warned you about that and asked you if it was okay. So I thank you because you've been so involved in the IBZ district and the zoning. So what we wanted to just start discussing is a number of issues about what do we do to get a consistency with the zoning in our IBZ district. What we're curious about, what were the aims when they did the study and what came out of the study, and also how we can work with our elected officials, with Evergreen, with the borough president, with the city, to come up with a plan that makes sense, at least for our district. And if it makes sense beyond that, so be it. Some of the thoughts and questions that we've had and that we've talked about are what size structures do we think we need? What size and what density can we live with? What density would actually beyond what density would it actually be detrimental to the community? Community spaces. Many of these buildings promise to provide community spaces, and then they don't, but they're occupied anyway. Is there a way that we can hold up occupancy until promised space is given, or at least a good faith effort to get it started is shown? And other issues like what kind of bonuses do we give when a developer promises to put in light manufacturing? How important is that? And then, of course, I think there's always the question that conflict, and I think there seems to be a conflict about these big entertainment venues. what do we want to do about that? I think that there is a sense that these industrial commercial spaces should not be allowed to be taken over by the entertainment venues, because my sense is that the IBZ districts were meant to protect industry and manufacturing and light manufacturing. I think there is some sense from city planning that they might settle for having the spaces given over to these big venues. So these are some of the thoughts I have. I suspect that other people here tonight will have additional things that you want to talk about. So Karen, I'm wondering if you might start by introducing us to some of the ideas that came up with the study and some of the things that that you've been working with, and that you and Evergreen have been, that you and Leah and Evergreen in general have discussed and have been working with.
Sure. I would have Leah, go through. She put together a couple of slides to
Okay,
show
great.
everybody. But
Great.
the main concern of the 25 Kent, special permit process was initially they were thinking of doing the 14 blocks of the M2 zoning, and they left out M1, which is, the edge basically of the IBZ, and those businesses, as of right now, could only go up maybe like a floor, one floor, and it just wasn't, cost effective for manufacturing to expand by one floor. So in the end, with the 25 Kent scenario, the city agreed to do the pilot and then just have it on a case-by-case basis. And that's how we are, where we're at currently with the special permit process within the IBZ. So, coming out of, recent, projects that's coming up in the area, there has been concern about, one, of course, the IBZs are mainly designated to protect manufacturing and light industry. So the encroachment of, as you said, the big space, event spaces came up. But I think, some of the concerns is where we're going case by case, and some are higher in density and bigger, and there's, concerns within the community about that. So the idea is to have a look, I think, have city planning come back, take a look at the IBZ and what would be fair, not only for the M2, but also for the M1 businesses within the district, to preserve manufacturing and have some commercial. So with that being said, maybe I should turn it over to Leah, just so that she could explain some of what Evergreen has done in looking at, the Brooklyn Innovation Study and the BOA. Evergreen has done a BOA plan, Brownfields Opportunity Study, and out of that, what we see makes sense, and hearing feedback from the property owners and the businesses within, the IBZ. So Leah, if you want to.
Hi, sure. I put a presentation to introduce us. Some of you may not know the work we do. Some of you are very familiar with the work we do. So if it's okay, can I share a presentation? Will it just let me? Am I allowed? Is it working?
Yes,
It's working, it's working.
Fabulous. Okay, so I will blast through the introductory, whoops, and we can focus a little more on the land use. So I'll start out. I'm Leah Archibald. I'm the executive director of Evergreen. Obviously, you guys are well acquainted with Karen. We've also brought along Stephen Fabian on our team, who will talk to you in a little more specificity about land use issues. He is in charge of all of our planning and real estate stuff. So Evergreen is a local development corporation that works with businesses in industrial North Brooklyn to help them grow so that we can keep working class jobs in our community. We are almost 40 years old. We were founded by, originally as the economic development arm of the St. Nick's Alliance, and we are our own independent 501c3. Our funding comes from some contracts with the city. Most of it we raise from private foundations and our businesses, but we also own and manage several different industrial properties, and some of the revenue from that also pays for some of the work we do. I don't need to go through our outcomes. We did work really hard helping our businesses with COVID relief efforts. But that is, I guess, not germane to this evening's conversation. But I will give you one highlight. We helped about 75 businesses get disaster loans. That is, for a teeny staff of 5, that was a monumental undertaking, but went a long way toward keeping the business community stable. We also managed to do, even though there was a pandemic, 10 multi-week seminars for small manufacturers on a variety of subjects. And what we can tell you is that the folks that participated in our seminars fared much better during the pandemic than our general businesses at large. Although most folks had a decline, the businesses that we work most closely with seems to have less of a decline. Why are industrial jobs important? Because they pay really well. In 2019, manufacturing jobs paid an average of almost $70,000 a year compared to $30,000 a year in food service. It offers higher wages and career opportunities to a workforce that is 80% people of color and 50% foreign born. Our community needs these jobs. About 40% of North Brooklyn residents work in industrial jobs. We've got over 1,000 firms with over 15,000 employees. And again, these jobs are terrific jobs for people that don't have high levels of education, that have some other impediment toward the workforce. Like maybe don't speak English well, or at all even. These are really high quality jobs that are attainable to lots of our community residents. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Stephen Fabian. Stephen, I will staff the slides here. But Stephen can tell you a little bit about the Brownfield Opportunity Area Planning Study we did a few years ago. For folks that have served on this committee for a while, you may remember we came and presented multiple times during the course of our study. But I will let Stephen fill you in.
Hello, good evening. I'm Stephen from Evergreen. Thanks for the introduction, Leah. Yeah, so our Brownfield Opportunity Area Plan was funded by New York State, and probably the most relevant thing to know about it is that we're really working simultaneously with the Department of City Planning while the North Brooklyn Industry and Innovation Study was happening, and we were able to do a lot of concurrent outreach. So can we go back to the map real fast?
Yeah, I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay. So sort of the high level takeaway is that this is what you're seeing is the full in color North Brooklyn Industrial Business Zone. So that's what we studied. We didn't look at Greenpoint Williamsburg IBZ, but we feel that this North Brooklyn IBZ has common areas. And within the IBZ, we decided that there's kind of some distinct districts. So in the yellow at the top is what we called sub-area A, and that we sort of characterized as very heavily dominated by the film industry. And so we came up with certain recommendations that would take that context into effect, because the film industry uses a lot of land, but it also provides a lot of support businesses beyond the studio space. Along the Newtown Creek, on the top we have a blue area, and then to the bottom we have a purple area. Really, that's the heart of the IBZ. These are both what we call the core industrial, and so this is where you see a lot of the heavy manufacturing, a lot of everything from the Department of Wastewater Treatment Facility down to the National Grid site, a lot of scrap metal recycling. Things that are big tend to be large parcels, tend to be open industrial uses, kind of stuff that really can't go anywhere else. And, just is what we consider to be like really the more the strong core. Like most of this, I believe, is currently zoned M3. So the core is something that we want to protect. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. There's a small area in the center that's sort of like a greenish. That area, I think we mistakenly used the word logistics. We're not really advocating for any sort of last mile facilities, but what the sort of interesting aspect of this district, it's small, but it's away from the core. The parcels are smaller. It starts to get closer to, say, the Cooper houses. It's not dominated by film studios, but it's not also seeing the same kind of commercial influx that we're seeing in the South. So it's really kind of an industrial area that, is kind of your standard light manufacturing with really good access because it's close to the BQE. So I think that's where the logistics kind of came in, is that it's really the heart of the IBZ. So it's just a really desirable location. And then at the bottom in the orange, this is sort of our analog to what DCP was calling their growth area. We called it sort of the competing and conflicting land use area, because this is where we see a lot of commercial infiltration, a lot of changes away from factories and warehouses to now a lot of entertainment uses, office uses, things of that sort. And it's obviously a change that's happened organically over the years and very rapidly, but this is also an area that's very job rich. This is the home of Boar's Head, Wonton Foods, Martin Greenfield Clothiers. It's an area that, while does have a more commercial and less industrial feeling in terms of new businesses, it really has a lot of anchor large-scale industrial businesses that we feel need special attention given all the changes around them. So on the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about some of the goals that came out of our study. The main one is that, I'm seeing a note here, the IBZ. So the IBZ where Acme is, that is the other IBZ, the Greenpoint Williamsburg IBZ. And our study did not look at that, but we would consider that orange area in the South, with a lot of mixed use, that would be very analogous to what we see over in the Greenpoint Williamsburg IBZ. And so it's the same kind of issue there, where you have some big anchor industrial businesses like Acme surrounded by a lot of change. And, we think is that it's important to make sure that those businesses can stay and grow in place to stay competitive, because most of our industrial owners of that scale typically own their land, which is a really great asset, but there's really not currently a lot of options to grow. So what we feel across the board, whether it's the core, whether it's the conflicting mixed use area, whether it's the film industry area, all the industrial businesses need to be able to have increased height and density, go up 1 floor, 2 floors, whatever the case might be. Some areas are not as dense as others. Oh, sorry. Why what? I just saw a Y pop in.
Yeah, I'm just wondering why sorry, I know there'll be questions later. Sorry, this is Katie. Why is it important that they have increased density and height?
Well,
Why
because
is that a given as an important thing? I'm wondering.
well, because they own the land they have. Additional land would be very expensive to purchase, and if they're allowed to build upwards, they could, add more jobs, more production space. We heard this from, Wonton Foods is really dying to expand. If the sound stages were able to have additional height, they could have a big sound stage on the ground floor, and then you could have the supporting businesses on the floors above. The wardrobe, the set design, the props, things like that. We're not necessarily looking to do dramatic density increases, but like right now in the M1 zones, which is about half of these districts, can really only be one story, maybe two. So it's just a way for them to not have to add additional property while taking advantage of what they have. That's what they told us they'd like to do,
The idea is to be able to grow jobs on site, because if they do need to expand, we want to make sure that we're able to retain the jobs in our community. Because as Stephen mentioned, it's so expensive for this space. If businesses really want to get bigger, they may need to leave the city altogether.
Yeah, I don't know if we have the exact data on it, but I believe the two IBZs in Community Board 1 are probably the most expensive industrial land in the city. So because of all the commercial property conversions that have happened, and also the central location, it's just made it very difficult for industrial property owners and renters to compete, because once you start getting to about $30 a square foot or more, it becomes extremely cost prohibitive, and it's very easy to find that as an asking rent, if not even higher. So the density would just allow them to take advantage of what they have and go upwards and expand in place. We also believe that the city agrees that the parking requirements are a little bit onerous for the industrial core areas. We also do think that adding some mixed commercial uses where it makes sense, such as in the south or the north, and also probably in the Greenpoint Williamsburg IBZ where there's already a lot of commercial, it's a great way to cross-subsidize the industrial expansion and also keep it affordable. So we're not, mixed use can actually be a good thing, but it just needs to be calibrated properly where there's, workable industrial space, not just thrown up on like the 5th floor where you can't access a freight elevator, and at a rent that makes sense, that takes advantage of the other rents that you're getting for maybe some ground floor retail or office uses. In the core area, we believe there's, besides looking at zoning code for for the size and density, there also needs to be a lot of changes to the uses. And I believe someone was speaking about entertainment uses or things like that, and we believe that in the core in particular, it's really not an ideal space for these entertainment venues. We think there also should be some restrictions by, not eliminate the use of, say, a restaurant or a bar, but keep them small in neighborhood serving, not necessarily like large destination beer gardens, things like that. So tightening up the use groups would be very helpful in the core area, because, things like a scrap metal yard or a wastewater treatment facility, there's really nowhere else to go. There's no new heavy industrial land being created. And so it's just important that they have some protections to make that land less desirable for anything else. Because right now you still can do a decent range of commercial uses, even in a heavy industrial area. And then, for the mixed use, as I was discussing, like cross-subsidization is a really useful tool to allow for the industrial partner to have their space at an affordable rate, whereas also accounting for the need for office jobs or other things in the area. And then the other thing that came up again and again and again, and I'm sure this will come as no surprise to anyone here, is that the infrastructure is lacking. there's massive amounts of traffic congestion. There's issues with trucks and loading zones and parking and all that. And we think that there needs to be a detailed look at roadways that might need to be widened. Definitely many roadways that need to be resurfaced. Maybe looking at the loading zone laws and right sizing them, because either some places require way too much loading, some places don't have enough. Maybe there's more creative ways to get trucks off the streets to make improved loading areas that remove traffic congestion. Things like better curb cuts in areas where there are a lot of deliveries, and also looking at parking regulations, just making sure they are compatible with business hours, things like that. So that's kind of the, just the broad goals and ideas. And like I said, we believe that particular southern area of the North Brooklyn IBZ is most compatible with the Greenpoint Williamsburg. So while we didn't study the Greenpoint Williamsburg in the same way, we kind of feel that there's a similar dynamic happening there. Oh, Leah, I think you're still muted.
How's that? It's not, I'm sorry about that. It's not that we didn't want to study it. It's that the state, because we did this on a grant from the state, they wouldn't allow us to study non-contiguous parcels. So we couldn't think of a way to draw the line all the way over. So we had to stick with one set of contiguous parcels for our study.
Can you all hear me? My computer crashed for a bit there, but I'm back, and I was on the phone while I was getting back on the computer. So can everybody hear me? Yes. Okay. So I have a question. Just where can you just for me, maybe everybody else got it, but where is it that you would feel the mixed use would be best served, and that the community would be best served, and the businesses would be best served for the mixed use? Would that be around the Acme and the areas that are furthest from the core?
So are we talking about taking a look at these prototypes for development goals and applying them to the Greenpoint Williamsburg area? That's what you're asking, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna have that clarification. Why don't you?
I think so. I think the green. I mean, I don't think there's really much that would be considered a core use in the Greenpoint Williamsburg IBZ at this time. I mean, maybe one or two parcels. I'm not, I don't know as well as the North Brooklyn IBZ, but it's much smaller, and it's just already so heavily commercial. I think, for us, it's.
I would actually consider around Acme the core.
Oh, okay.
I'm just, saying, and there's still a lot of, Banker Street, you have Barry Expo, you have, a lot of production going on over there. So yeah, I would consider that the core, because once you go, down to like where Brooklyn Bowl and Brooklyn Brewery, and you have the hotels and everything. So, outside of that, that's where all the encroachment is happening. And I think by Acme, those, blocks would, in my opinion, be considered a core.
Yeah,
so if you say they're the core, would you, is that still though an area where you would have commercial and office space, or do you think that should be just industrial?
I wouldn't, I guess like what Steve was saying, I would consider it maybe more of that like green area.
What do you mean green area?
Well,
sorry.
Oh, okay. So let me back up a little bit. So the idea is really to give you from the North Brooklyn, because how we had looked at South, Brooklyn and what they were doing in the Gowanus. I really wanted to get kind of across with the BOA plan, really some additional for us to look at what tools or just kind of like a guideline, and then we could take a deeper look block by block in the GW to see kind of what matches and what guidelines or what we want to see as far as expansion is concerned. So I really wanted them to show you what we've done in the North Brooklyn, and 100%. What is the BOA plan? The Brownfields Opportunity Area, which Stephen just went over, is the BOA plan. So, like I said, I really wanted to get across of what development goals that we were looking at for the North Brooklyn IBZ, and it does mirror the GW in some circumstances. So I think there's an opportunity for us to look at it and then maybe pull some ideas of those goals that we wanted to look at the GW is what I'm trying to say. So not necessarily core purple, don't allow nothing here, but really what are the needs of the businesses, and the expansion is the same. You hear it from every single business that I need to expand, I can expand due to the fact that I'm only allowed one floor. It's not cost effective. I need, right now real estate is so expensive, and it's easier for me just to go to Jersey and move my business to Jersey. So that's where, the expansion and the needs are for the businesses to retain those local jobs and grow jobs here in Greenpoint and North Brooklyn.
And let me jump in for a second. As you remember, during that whole the 25 Kent and looking at those blocks, and there were folks that were right outside of that M12 area that wanted their opportunity to build up a little too. And what we're talking about is a modest amount of space. The idea for a lot of these folks is if they want to grow in place, then maybe get their office uses off the ground floor. Put their office and maybe some storage in an upper floor so that they can expand their production on the ground floor. This is kind of the sort of expansion a lot of the folks surrounding this area had told us that they wanted to see. And then I think the model that Stephen presented for that southern area, the competing and conflicting uses area, the model that we propose to both allow commercial development while retaining manufacturing jobs is in this particular area is to give like a little bit of a bonus to folks that want to expand their building, keep manufacturing in. Stephen, you want to elaborate on that?
Okay, sure. Our BOA plan was kind of thinking that a realistic goal could be about 1/3 of industrial space to 2/3 of commercial space. Since then, since we released the plan and had actual conversations with developers and people that are trying to do this, most people are not able or interested in doing quite that much. So, sort of adjusting for practical matters, we kind of think 20, maybe 25 in a really great circumstance, but really we think the baseline should be 20%, so if it's
20% industrial.
Yeah. In terms of, that's sort of, we feel the sweet spot between, what gives you the ability to have some more density for the commercial, but also to provide a decent amount of industrial space. So like, say it's a 5 FAR building, one FAR would be for industrial. Like, I think the 25 Kent model ended up being 0.8 out of 4.8, so 1/6, which is like about 17%. And that's what a lot of people have tried. That's usually what the opening round of negotiations is. But, we think at least 20 is something we want to see. And if it could be 25 or 33%, that'd be amazing. But the economics make that difficult to, just acknowledge that reality, especially because the sales of real estate are so expensive and you're not really going to get people that are going to take a loss, unfortunately. Because to make the numbers work and to offer a little bit more of an affordable rent, you have to either have a lot more commercial space or very expensive commercial space. So that's where we sort of see the trade-off. And I think Karen's made a good point about how all these kind of recommendations could apply within the GW. It just is that probably the feeling of the GW overall is most like what we would call that conflicting and competing land use, because there's been a lot of commercial activity in this IBZ over here too.
And then I just want to point out is, again, right now, as of right, any depending on where, what the zoning is in the industrial zone, they can convert to full commercial. So, and there's no preservation of manufacturing, so they don't need to put manufacturing in. And this is an opportunity where we could, if they do want to do commercial and have a bonus, to require them that they retain and maintain, as like Stephen was saying, the 20% manufacturing, and give them, a bonus. And that in itself, where it's not completely converted to commercial.
Yeah, and I think one more point too is it's important to remember the sort of the relationship between the mixed use and the core. We really want to discourage commercial conversions in the core, really of any kind. We don't want the entertainment. We don't want big restaurants. Again, small neighborhood store. And so to keep that a more strict, pure industrial, again, you kind of have to boost the mixed use a little bit more, because some of that stuff might go elsewhere.
Can I ask a question? Yeah, can you talk about why that wouldn't be a good mix? Why you wouldn't want a significant influx of the entertainment, commercial activity in
the overarching issue is, it's not always a compatible use with manufacturing jobs. Right. In some ways you'd think, well, it's, it turns it into a 24-hour community, right? They operate at night and the manufacturers during the day. But it's depending on use and enforcement and traffic and pedestrian traffic, it may not be greatly compatible with manufacturing jobs, but the big underlying trend is that those commercial uses can pay so much more than manufacturers can for the real estate that it just drives them out, right? It not only takes that property off of the market for manufacturers, it takes even more property off because it drives up the price of surrounding parcels and making it harder and harder for manufacturers to stay in the neighborhood.
Can I make a comment?
She has her hand raised though.
Sure. Just.
Can I or somebody else first?
Sure, go ahead. I'm not seeing the hand raises.
I raised mine before, but I lowered it because I thought nobody was.
Katie has her hand raised.
Yeah, Katie has her hand up, but she's on mute. She has to unmute herself.
Okay, well, Sante, why don't you?
Sure, now, Stephen, I want to say something, both a question and a comment. I've been renting myself an industrial space in these last 15 years. It's a 3-story warehouse. It's 12,000 square feet. I rent one floor. The owner is a manufacturer. It's a friend of mine. I've been using the space both for designing and manufacturing. And now during COVID, it's been a difficult time. So it's kind of family type. It's an owner, owns the building, manufacturing himself. One thing that we should make everybody aware, that the real estate taxes, the property taxes are so high in this 12,000 square feet. And this is the issue really, about $30,000 a year, which is substantial if you compare to actually to taxes that many developers don't pay for residential. And it really, it's the system of taxation is pushing out people like me, and I've been hiring people, some on a full-time base, some occasionally when I need it, a dire rate. I'm saying that sometimes not the large manufacturing, but the small manufacturing allow them to pay people $40 an hour if you're a skilled worker. Even if you don't have an high school degree, you can still make the money if you're really skilled in what you're doing. So that's valuable. Even independent people, craftsmen, we're excluding another category, which are artists, craftsmen, creative people, which organically along the decades, they filled again this space. Now we're forgetting about them. I believe that together, they've been a very valuable forces. And by turning into commercial, we're not giving this opportunity anymore to this very creative force that's produced kind of a higher revenue. They will never make the money because maybe they don't have a master's degree, but they have skills. And so what about the real estate taxes? Because that's a serious issue. And my friend, as a landlord, which bought the building, is by Morgan, on Metropolitan Morgan, overlooking the back look at Cooper Park. Along the years, it's been offered a lot of money. He paid the building for very little money. And that allowed him to be a manufacturer. And he's never been greedy, really. But he bought the space upstate because the taxes are really making difficult. So sooner or later, he's going to have to make the conversion, but sell it to somebody else. And this is what we should focus on. What about taxes? What are we doing to actually facilitate the owner of this building, and reducing their taxes as we've been reducing taxes to the developer?
Yeah, so we may not have a satisfactory answer for you on this, because I can tell you, even during COVID, man, the Department of Finance did not let us miss a payment, right? No one got a property tax break, right? Everybody got to pay their income taxes a few months later, but the city did not give any break on the income tax because they need it, right? The property tax, because they need it for revenues. Really, the only trick we got right now for lowering property taxes would be an incentive that's related to improving your property. And you have to put a very large amount of money into the property to access this benefit. Karen Nieves is an expert on this particular incentive, but you're right. It's a real problem. But I don't know if we can find a way out right now.
But that's what is really pushing the real estate out. At least you don't become the real estate owner and you want to turn into commercial. So there is no willingness to keep the industrial.
And you're absolutely right, Sante, because the businesses have said how their taxes are going up and up. And again, if if a commercial use, which is a higher, tax bracket in the next door, it's the competing uses as well that's driving up the taxes as well.
I pay that taxes.
Yeah,
because that in commercial leases, industry.
Yes, it goes to the tenant. You're absolutely right. Any increase in the property taxes, the tenant is the one who's on the hook for it.
$1,000, 29 point whatever. Actually, there was a reduction of $300, but $29,000 and
so I think I want to just cut off, because I think it's very clear that it's true. This is a big problem. I wonder if any of our electeds here have any thoughts on this, any possible solutions?
Yes, I do.
Yes.
So, just talking about like the presentation from Evergreen, to start from the background, talking about like the administration and how our office has worked with the IBZ Evergreen is there's no restriction from the administration on this kind of like situation. The BCP, the Bushwick Community Plan, is one example in Bushwick about like how the administration wanted to add more office spaces instead of like manufacture, and also increase the height of the buildings. And it was mostly not providing the affordability that we were expecting. That's why something that didn't happen in Bushwick. In Williamsburg, it's kind of like the same. We do agree 100% with Evergreen. We have worked hand on hand with Leah and Karen for anything related to the IBC. We always touch base with them. They're like our experts. The council member is a manufacturer elected official, always advocating for the IBC. But the issue that happened when the mayor started the story about like, I would say about like 5 years ago, nothing got done except the permits, a special permit for the hotels. So the hotels are a big issue that haven't been discussed, but they only have a special permit to avoid like any future hotel to be built. We know that there's a lot of hotels that were like pop-ups hotels that were like built like really quick before that law. But about the taxes, it's the same. I do believe that the mayor doesn't have any real commitment to the IBC per se, but we need to like trying to like figure out like legislation or like the administration to make any law that protects, like could be a taxes, could be, we agree about like the building like higher, but yeah, of course one story is not cost effective, but there's no like real commitment. So that's something that is going to be until the next mayor takes place and we try to like figure out something. I just wanted to like drop that out about like the BCP, and Karen, I'm sure that she's an expert on that and how difficult it was to get something done in Bushwick related to the IBC and affordability.
So I have a thought or a question. I think that to me there's a threshold question here that I will put to the committee and
Well,
to
Del,
the.
I also wanted to make a comment at some point. Sorry, Del.
That's fine. I think there's a threshold question that we all need to talk about. I don't know if we have the answer. And I think the threshold question is there consensus that we do value keeping our industry? Because there is, I think, this conflict. Yes, we want industry, but we don't want them to intrude on we don't want the buildings to be too high. We don't know how much extra space we want to give them, and we don't want them impinging on our more, on any surrounding residential areas. These are the areas where there, because there are plenty of areas where we have industry, but within a couple of blocks, there are some residences. And I think this is an honest question that we need to discuss. Do we agree that we want to protect the industry, that it is important to keep industry and jobs and the diversity that industry and these kind of jobs bring to the community? And then if we all agree to that, and I don't know that everybody does, I personally think it's important, but then I think we get on to, okay, so then do we all understand and accept the fact that it's pretty unanimous that all of the businesses say they need to be able to expand upwards? And then can we come to some kind of a consensus as to how much of an expansion we can live with? So yes, Katie, I think you're muted.
I think that's a really good question. And okay, so just to put this into a larger context, 25 Kent was an asterisk at the bottom of a page that two people caught at the last minute. Otherwise, that would have gone through as 14 blocks. And it's only because a few people pushed for it in the community board meeting and said, we need a special meeting for this, that there was light shed on it. Otherwise, it would have been a whole 14 blocks. So that 25 Kent happened, and they got those huge, office space with a little bit of manufacturing. And then what happened? Speculation. And that's why that property is so expensive now, is because of the speculation coming in that they're going to get those special permits also. And then because their property is so expensive, they say, oh, if I'm going to keep manufacturing, then I got to have a high office tower, just like Acme asked for 10 stories, which is 107 feet. So now we've got people saying, I can't afford to do manufacturing because I paid so much money because paid so much money because of speculation. So we're stuck feeling kind of sorry for them, because they can't afford it otherwise. And it's really kind of, unless I got it wrong, it's sort of a sham. We have one Wythe, which just came up. It's not certified yet, but it looks like exactly the same thing. They're putting in 9 stories of office space, and who knows how little bit of manufacturing. And is that the solution? Well, I thought we were looking for a solution so that they could expand 1 floor. That's not what's happening here. And it's our business zone. It's not just one Wythe. It's probably all those other properties that are so expensive that they're going to ask for that special permit, and it's going to go. So that's what I have to say. I would like to know, what would that zoning be that would be 1 more story or 2 more stories or something. I don't think we should, as a community, fall for this scenario.
I make a comment?
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I guess one of the scariest sites for me is the William Vale site, because they built that structure as of right. And recently I found out that they didn't use all of their FAR. They only used, I guess, about 60% of the FAR, which was a bonus they received for creating the community facility that's never been occupied.
Right.
And so that's why I feel like the text amendment tool is good in that it, locks in that 17% manufacturing. Maybe that number, for future areas would be better if it was higher. But I feel like the more I just hear about the community facility density bonus, I really dislike it. I look at in the M11 edge of the GW, there's a lot 4052 Franklin, which was a 1-story building, and it was torn down, and now it's a 6-story building because they used the community facility density bonus. So, I mean, it's 6 stories versus 22 stories. But I guess what potentially could happen is a developer could come in, buy a lot, evict the manufacturing tenant, and use a density bonus and put in, again, an empty community facility versus preserving manufacturing. So that's why I think the tools that are being discussed, I think are really important, both for GW and for the North Brooklyn zone.
And that's one of the reasons, we engaged with this BOA report, because anytime you talk to Department of City Planning, and this is where Richard Barrett comes in, he can speak about this at great length. Anytime you talk to them about something, they're like, my toolbox has a hammer, a Phillips head screwdriver, and a saw. Do you need a hammer, a Phillips head screwdriver, and a saw? Because if you need a flathead screwdriver, they don't have it. Right. So, what we wanted to do in the BOA report was create some more tools that take these factors into account. But that the problem is the ones that city planning has right now are very limited. So it can either be this or that, it's that's what we hope to do with the BOA study, was to, come up with some new models that could in fact, be new tools in their toolkit.
Dell,
Yes,
can I ask a question?
sure.
Leah, is the only, because the way the Greenpoint Williamsburg IBZ is right now, is really the only viable way for industrial property owners to expand, to invite a commercial tenant to, so that they have 20% and the commercial tenant builds 80 on top of them in order, I mean, that seems to be what
It
I'm
is,
hearing.
it's hard. It's like, it wouldn't be possible for us to give a blanket answer to that.
Of course.
You know, it depends on ownership patterns and when the property was purchased, you know, but don't- I wouldn't say that that's the only way to improve your property, depending on like what you owe on it and what you paid for it and how long you've owned it. But I would say that the current parking requirements and some of the other limitations are hemming legit industrial businesses in.
But do you think that's something we should be discussing? What could be changed to create the tool to allow the industrial owners not to sell out to the commercial developers, and so we don't end up with office towers in that IBZ? I mean, is that something that we should be talking about?
So can I just intercede here? I think what I'm hearing is, and I didn't necessarily hear it tonight, but over the years, I think that there is a sense that we do want to keep industry. If that's not the case, then that's a discussion we need to have. But if we do agree that we want industry, then I think there is that next question. What do we do so that we don't have these huge towers, which result basically in a little bit of space for industry, and then these huge buildings that have office space that many members of the community board have expressed concern about, and have felt that maybe they don't even sense maybe that we really need this much office space. And then there's a fear that down the road that's going to be turned into a hotel or residential because indeed the office space is not really filling up. And so I'm thinking, how do we, maybe we need to work with you, Leah, and with our electeds and with the borough president to talk about what tools we need so that we don't have to have 8 or 9 story buildings. Maybe the parking requirements or something. Maybe we don't want these bonuses for community facilities because we don't find that the developers have had any credibility with giving us these facilities. Maybe we decide let's argue and let's maybe work together to support some of these changes so that developers don't have to, I don't want to say they don't have to, because I guess they never have to, so that we can come up with a plan that enables developers to build on a smaller scale, but still be able to afford to have affordable industrial space.
Totally. So, and again, that's why we did this proactive plan to make like these, to do some actual goal setting and think about the recommendations. And so part of it is like, what's the menu of options, right? In terms of like land use and height and use, et cetera. But then the other side, and this is a real problem now, is the enforcement, right? How do you make these things enforceable, and the Williamsville is a perfect example. 7 empty stories of community facility that act as a stilt, so every single room has a river view. They're under no obligation to lease that out. Nobody checks to see if they've leased it out. They can just keep it as an empty stilt, for their time immemorial, and so we see this definitely with the, the folks that come in that want to do mixed industrial commercial, what is the mechanism to make sure that they're leasing out to manufacturers, to make sure that they're offering it at rates that make sense for a manufacturer, and then who can oversee this over the long term? And right now, Department of City Planning will say no one, because there's no agency to do this. Once Department of Buildings signs off on gives them the C of O, they're done with oversight. So, one thing we have recommended in a couple of recent projects was to see if we can loop in the city's industrial development agency. If this is a property that's going for the IDA benefit, the IDA actually will do 25 years of oversight to ensure that the uses in their approved application match what's going on inside the doors. And we have seen them claw back hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of benefit when something that was supposed to be a metal powder coating facility turned into a yogurt shop and gymnasium. So, they're starting, the idea is starting to warm up to maybe taking a role in this. So, we're trying to be as creative as possible and making sure that, people not only have to do, in what's in their zoning agreement, but that there's some oversight as well over the long term.
I mean, oversight is totally critical. This is always the problem.
But I think you were asking a different question though, Del, right? You were asking what mechanisms are there to enable some kind of affordability and at the same time not have the high office towers. Like what zoning, I don't know, maybe we need a new administration to come in to give us that. Isn't there a problem with intermediate zoning? Like it's either 1 story or 10 stories or something like that?
Well,
anyway, I thought your question was a good one.
If we wait for a new administration, then we're going to have some more. We're going to have some more big buildings by that time, right?
Yeah, but
I think we need to advocate now for whatever.
Yes.
And get the candidates to make this a priority.
Can I say something really quick?
Yes, please.
So just wanted about what Trina mentioned about the tools. I do remember about 3 years ago, Evergreen was doing workshops for the business owners, like the industrial business owners. So they all know what is needed to get a better IBC. I'm just saying that this because the administration knows what the business owners of the manufacturer need in order to improve and thrive. And the other thing that I just wanted to mention about the growth zone nearby Morgan Avenue, that's something that we got battered about 2 years ago with the Love Law. And we were the only one, even though that's a state law, we were the only one advocating for the IDC in the industrial area. So it's a really difficult position, but at the end of the day, it's about restrictions. Everything has to be agreements, but it has to be restrictions in order for these developers don't buy land and leave it there sitting there to see what they can do after to make more profit. That's everything I have to say.
I have a question for Richard. I recently saw the borough president's recommendation for the Acme application. And if I understood correctly, it looks like they recommended codifying the requirement for, keeping, manufacturing tenant in the new facility and promoting other like maker spaces and that type of thing. And is that maybe a tool that could be scaled up?
So the idea was to take the model that was established with 25 Kent, where at least you have that third-party oversight, you have things publicized, websites and different things that make it easier to monitor. So the problem with the M3 district is, for whatever reason, city planning didn't allow us simultaneously rezoning to M12 with the special permit. And you're going to have a similar issue coming up with 307 Kent. You may have a similar issue across the street from Community District 1 at 500 Kent, which is right at the edge of the Navy Yard. So why city planning can allow an applicant to go from M3 to M12 and have a simultaneous special permit, or even M14 and adjust the special permit. By the way, M14 is essentially M12 without parking, and just reduce the scale of the special permit to not deal with the parking reduction. You know, that's something obviously this administration staff is sticking with. A next administration staff may look at that differently, right? So because we don't have the special permit, how do we have a next best thing, which is replicating all the zoning requirements into some other vehicle? So whether it's a contract with a third party, whether it's tied into IDA financing, even though IDA financing may only go X number of years, could you get such a contract to be permanent? You know, in Acme's case, we're all hoping the world is perfect and Acme never has a reason to go out of business. And they're building somewhat custom space separate and apart from the office building. So you might think, well, the space is perfect to keep as a make or use. It's going to be Food and Drug Administrative, standards, right? Because it's food processing. So you'd hate to let that space go. So hopefully we'll see what the process does, but hopefully it will, as best as possible, equate what is in the zoning for the special permit.
So we do have 307 Kent coming up.
Correct. 307 Kent is going to be a little different because in addition to the 5 zoning floor area ratio for commercial industrial, it wants to at least play out the idea of using the community facility. So M15, in addition, unlike the special permit that stops at 4.8, the M15 that Acme is asking for, but Acme is not playing with, that's Acme side could have asked for 6.5, but the special permit for bulk comes with drawing, so it's not asking for 6.5. 307 Kent doesn't seek bulk envelope relief, so it's actually asking for the 6.5. So in its perfect world, it will find one or more medical providers to fill up. People will have different views of medical providers in terms of the type of jobs that somewhat equate industrial jobs, because to be doing record keeping, billing, whatever else, there's not as much skilling. There's some skill set it's good to come in with, right? There are certain tech programs out there. So in some way you could consider them an industrial job. I'll let Leah's organization speak if they feel comfortable that, that's a win getting those kind of jobs. But if that happens, is that enough to say, well, the 5 FAR, we're not going to try to equate the strategy at Acme, or going into District 4, which Karen and Leah know, the Sidem rezoning, where there's industrial space that the goal is to expand it and not have the expansion or the existing to be wide open office or retail, right? So you're going to be dealing with 307 soon, and you'll have to make your mind up how you want to handle that.
Right.
But 307, they're not applying for a special permit. They're just looking for the bonus for the facilities,
well, it's not
right?
a bonus.
Community facility.
It's
not
an
a bonus.
upzoning with
It's an upzone.
floor area don't call community facility a bonus. It's preferential floor area that
Okay.
allows above and beyond floor area. And Acme's special permit was based on bulk and purely bulk because they had constraints to try to fit the floor area because the Acme building didn't allow for a full coverage above the Acme building. So the folks at 307, they're able to fit their building into the zoning envelope without a problem. So therefore, they didn't trigger a special permit.
But they are asking for the additional floor area with the promise that they will give us community facility space.
Well, they're asking for an upzoning from commercially 2 to 5, and that same zone allows an additional 1.5 preferential floor area. So you could build the building 100% medically at a multiplier of 6.5, or if you think you can make more money with office, then you maximize the office and retail and you use that preferential because you believe you could fill it up. You know, unlike the William Vale that's choosing not to or hasn't found a medical home, they still had a cost to build that space, even if they're not getting revenue from it. So it's not exactly a freebie to lift the views at hotel rooms. It's a calculated play. I think at one time, and I'm not going to say that one time ever ends, in a perfect world, if they could get a special permit similar to 25 Kent to allow some of that medical to be maker space and some of it to be office space, I think they would love to do that. They're not eligible to too high, but with the zoning text change and a willingness, if it made sense for the community board to have some of that community facility space to be maker space in exchange for office space, then you should pursue that.
Is there an argument to be made that because the William Vale couldn't fill their preferential floor area, how is 307 Kent able to say that they want to build it and say that they can fill it?
So the question is, what efforts were made at William Vale? You know, because in theory, they could go to BSA and play financial hardship that they couldn't fill it. They haven't done that. So I really can't speak to Williams Vale's intent to fill it versus William Vale maybe was hoping to figure out a way to be eligible for the special permit and find that balance of industrial. The folks at 307, you'll get a chance to question them because they'll likely be certified, whether it's the next cycle, which is March 15th or into April, but you would expect some point in the spring they're going to be coming for the public process. So these are questions you could have in terms of their expectation for medical. You know, medicals change, right? So whether it's response to Obamacare, you have the urgent care facilities, you have certainly ambulatory medical happening in many different ways, whether it's outpatient surgeries, dialysis centers. So how much of that has been happening given the population gain in the larger Williamsburg Greenpoint community? We do know some of your R6 areas that were not contextually zoned until after buildings got built with community facility use. I don't know how full they got. So, you know, that helps think about this. You got those couple of towers on both sides of the BQE trench, right? Is some of that going to be community facility medical, ambulatory medical centers? You know, you have right off of Broadway, what's happening with those buildings? So I don't have enough to say what's been successful or not, but 307 Kent will share their philosophy to the extent you ask them.
And then how can we enforce their their obligation to put in these facilities?
So the medical, right, they leave it vacant or not. There's not a lot you could do community facility wise in a M district. So they could file a BSA special permit to put in, say, a child care center because they're within 400 feet of residential. So that would be an allowable use. Certainly a pre-K, similar, it's the same special permit. Beyond that, there's almost nothing you can do community facility wise in an M district other than a museum associated to film production. So that's not exactly realistic. So regarding the remainder of the 5 FAR, unless there's some sidebar contractual agreement, the zoning does nothing but allow any range of office, industrial, retail, and it could be 100% of any of those uses.
So we would have to have some kind of a sidebar agreement, something in writing with the agreement by the developer to.
Yes, if that's something you want. So there's multiple layers to go for that. The most cutting edge is what was done by Community Board 8.
Right.
Del, I know you had some conversations with them. They had basically the equivalent of a CBA. They had a binding contractual agreement for a modest amount of ground floor space to be a very limited range of retail going into maker kind of use. Because even in certain higher retail districts, there are maker uses, and we reference them in our ACME recommendation, like more modest uses. There's a use group 11 that's sort of manufacturing, but it's typically smaller scale. So even things like in use group 9, making false teeth, that's manufacturing, yet that's use group 9. So we're a little bit flexible going outside of the traditional manufacturing uses in our ACME and some of the recent recommendations we did. So yes, if the board felt this is an agreement we need and that you'd have the council's backing, could contractual agreements be done with your industrial service providers? One's on the call, but that's a vehicle, right? And beyond that, I'm not sure, but the question is, does the council want to know that that's executed before they vote? That's the key. In the Community Board 8's case, it was executed before the council had to vote. If it's not executed, then you don't have standing, because once the council adopts the zoning, it is what it is.
Right.
And the other thing,
any thoughts? Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, I was going to say the other thing in ACME's case, the company's there, right? And if all goes well, the IDA provides another mechanism to lock certain things in.
Right. Alexis, do you have any thoughts about whether the councilman would back this up? If we got, if we wanted to have them enter into an agreement?
Is this in Antonio's district?
Oh, is it? Oh, it may be Steve Levin's district. I guess it is. Yeah.
Right. So then this becomes a question of council member deference and all whatever else.
Right.
Council conversation.
Right.
Yeah.
Leah, do you have any thing you want to add to this?
No, I'm really glad you guys had us as a guest. We are happy, as Alexis notes, we are happy to be a resource. Obviously, we share our precious resources, Karen, with you on an ongoing basis. But really, we are here to help. We're happy to help. For those of you that are really interested in like the nuts and bolts of our BOA recommendations, you can look at our executive summary, which is on our website. And if you really, really like details, you can look at the full plan, which goes into excruciating detail with analysis and how we've come to these recommendations. But, you don't have to, take the tools that we've dreamed up and use them. But if it helps you guys as a jumping off point to brainstorm and imagine the sorts of things that would be necessary to see the kinds of development that you want, go ahead and use it. We're happy to help and answer any questions.
I have a question. If you have a sense of how valuable you find the um, the community space promises with respect to getting the additional floor space. I mean, how important to our industry do you find that the community space agreements to be? So they're not even
Like
agreements really, but
the medical offices?
yeah. How have you come to any kind of decision on that? Have you studied it at all?
Uh, we have not, because like the weird hybrid that was inspired by that, with the mixed use commercial industrial is much more what we are focusing on and much more what we get asked to react to because it's in the industrial zone. Um, I don't know if we can proffer much of an opinion other than my shoot from the hip. Is there a finite amount of infusion centers that North Brooklyn people who need infusion need to go to, right? Or market for that. It's a
And I
pretty
would like
limited
to-
amount of uses in those community spaces.
Yeah.
And the other thing I want to mention is city planning, that study they released about a year ago with the jobs. One of the growth sections, which we've known for quite a long time anyhow, but is the medical industry, right? So it's an important job sector, although I thought in the North Brooklyn study that the goal was to remove the community facility preferential bulk for most, if not all, of that study area.
Do you remember that?
I think we were more, like thinking of swapping it, right? Like turning it from the community facility more to the industrial bonus kind of a thing. But that might have been before the medical jobs report came out. Also, I just want to say I did put a link to the plans in the chat, so just not that they're too hard to find on our website, but
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
And
Thank you.
so there's the full version and the executive summary version. And yeah, I think we talked a lot about sort of that cross subsidy model, but I do think there's a healthy amount of industrial businesses that would only require like a modest 1 or 2 floors to just grow in place and not have commercial tenants. It's just there's no real mechanism for that is easy, but I do think that's something that's plausible, because I know that was a question about, does it have to be, big office towers with a little bit of industrial space? And I don't think that it would have to exclusively be that. Maybe in certain areas.
What would be that designation of zoning that would allow for that?
Well, I think maybe just, you could keep the M3 or something and just make it a higher FAR, like go from 2 to 3 or 3 to 4 or something.
Include a parking waiver that frees up some space.
Because maybe that's something, Del, we should be talking about is how to craft that so that, and ask city planning for that.
I agree. I think that maybe we need
We've
to
been asking
have
for it
another.
for a long time, I think.
Yes, and maybe we need to bring back city planning to say, look, we want to talk to you about changes in the tools so that we can accommodate industry, but also not have to deal with the developers being in a position where they can credibly say, look, because of the parking and because of various things, there's no way we can get away without doing a tower. And I think we need to talk about the community facility bonuses and how we as a community board feel about that and whether we think that that should be taken off the table.
Something.
Back to the other question, just can I ask quickly, Steve and Leah and Karen, are there enough businesses right now in the Greenpoint, Williamsburg, IBZ to be asking for that and asking for it quickly before it's not there and they all end up going with developers? Are there enough businesses right now that we can go to city planning and say, we need this tool and we need it fast?
Survey them.
We've gone to city planning. Literally my first week on the job in 2007, we actually went to city planning with a group of the businesses in the M11 to talk about their needs to expand up. So we've been having this conversation with them for a long time. You know, I don't know if they can be moved. I do know that if we created a tool that allowed businesses to do this, particularly if it was to expand their manufacturing operation, I think, you know, city planning is conceptually warm to it. They actually had a thing like this in their North Brooklyn Industry and Innovation Plan. But I don't know what kind of movement we'd get from them, but certainly we work with all sorts of industrial businesses that could legitimately do this if they were given the opportunity. And price prevents them from doing it, right? Then they've got to hire the fancy land use attorney and go through, you know, the public process. Like, if this were a tool, I think we'd see more of it.
So does it make sense to you, Leah, to come back to this committee with with the limited goal of discussing some tools that we could all work together to present to city planning, where we could, you know, team up, so to speak, with you?
So I think first off, your timing, you don't have a lot of clock left at this current administration city planning. So I don't really see, no matter what conversations you have, really anything really happening in this administration, because it's going to require either a zoning text change or a zoning map change and resources. So I think you have to maybe set the stage with official community board position, kind of like 197A. So you have incoming council members that influence, right? You know, incoming borough presidents, incoming mayor. So coming up with a platform, for example, if you wanted to help all the one-story, one FAR commercial industrial properties that, by the way, their community facilities 2.4, but, you know, they don't have a lot of value in it. So the idea of a universal upzoning, removing parking, like if you took the M11 and you went up to double it and you went to M14, now you're up to 2 commercially. The problem is, and you get rid of the parking, if that's okay. The problem is its community facility jumps to 6.5. So it's kind of like you want a new zoning district, take an existing district, but remove a piece of it. Like to say, well, we want M14, but in community district 1, it should not have a community facility preferential floor area, for example, as an idea. And the idea of, could you take the special permit where you remove the community facility FAR that they have? Could you say, well, we want that to be closer to as of right in some way? You know, these are the type of things you could think about. So you could come up with a platform of what you want and then try to encourage, you know, educate the candidates and, you know, try to have a conversation with the incoming administration. You know, once you sense who may be the incoming administration.
Right. So that it seems to me that now is the time to start to do this, not wait until we get a new administration and then start looking at what we'd like to get them to do.
Yeah, what you like, work on your yourself as a vision,
Right.
right?
So I would recommend, and I mean, the committee can please weigh in on this. I would recommend that we continue to discuss with Richard and with our council members and with you, Leah, with your organization, some specific tools that we can that we can all get behind and that we can start pushing for.
May not have the tools now.
Right, right. But it's a vision, right? This is our vision. We would like to see this. And maybe what we can do just to is as simply as possible is to take a look at the GW IBZ. Take a look at what we've recommended for parts of the North Brooklyn IBZ, and then maybe draft a map of where we might apply some of these different recommendations that we've already got in the bank and done the research for.
Yes, absolutely.
And then Del, maybe we could invite like Brian Paul from City Council, because he's really, really good with the zoning as well, and make sure that our elected officials and the next meeting that we have is involved. And then I have a question regarding the permit, the 25 Kent special permit. Should we maybe be looking at that permit in ways that we could make an amendment to it? Since it's an existing permit and maybe there's things that we could add to it.
Are we in a position where we could do that?
We had recommendations at 25 Kent, and we've repeated them a little bit in a couple of special permits. So the 25 Kent evolved a little bit for us because certain things was sort of done in a somewhat different way, but not exact way than what we had, but close enough, so we let go, right? So if you look at what we still advocated for at the other two special permits, which are pretty much in Acme as well, the idea that these are things that if you change the zoning text, you could make the special permit better. So yes, if you like what we wrote, great. If you don't, great. If you have other ideas, the idea of what else can you do that special permit? We got what we got then, the council with the administration made it better than what it was when 25 Kent first came to you, but how can we make it better, right? We had issues because it wasn't applicable to the M11 properties, for example. So there's a bunch of things, did we get far enough with enforcement? We literally wanted, like when you go to the elevator and you see fire exiting plans, we wanted plans mounted in a very public way to say, this is the protected space, make it, no realtor can mess that up.
But at this point, can the terms of that special permit be changed?
Not retroactively, but to each one moving forward if we get a change of the zoning text. So there's no reasons why not to make it better for future generations if better is something you agree with.
And that would be even with 25 Kent, in other words, that building, we could actually no. This would just be the special permit in general, you're saying, but not with respect to 25 Kent.
Future people that apply for it.
Okay. So then the answer is yes, Karen, we should look at the special permit and see what we would want to change for the future.
Yeah, but look at our recommendations as a starting point for what we still have put out there to help stimulate your conversation.
And where can we find these recommendations?
Our ULURPs are sent to your office, but they're also on our website. So I think one was North 13th Street. I forget, the other one might have been called Franklin. And again, a lot of the language is put into, like the Acme borrowed from a lot of that language.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Del, there's just
Yes.
one more concern that I wanted to speak on that does impact the IBZs, which is Cuomo, the state is proposing to override commercial residential, commercial to residential conversions. So meaning a commercial space or a hotel could actually convert to residential. The commercial, it looks like that it's primarily in Manhattan that he's looking to do this, but the hotels is where really we should be concerned, because especially in the IBZs, that means that they could potentially convert those hotels into residential. So I just wanted to bring this up. I'm not sure of the timeline on this. I don't know if Leah knows, or maybe Richard, if Richard knows anything.
I know there was a hearing last week in Albany about it, and our coalition of organizations did testimony. I don't know what its next step is, though, in terms of the legislation. If it's legislation at all, I don't know. I can find out, though.
Yeah, is there like a comment period still open? Maybe like the community board, because I mean, I'm really concerned because we have so many little transient hotels all over the IBZs. And that's just a nightmare for conversions. I mean, right now we're, a lot of them, especially in, the North Brooklyn IBZ, is being used for shelters. Also, a portion of the hotels, but this would definitely be an opportunity for them just to convert completely to residential. So we don't want that. Well, maybe I speak for myself. I gotta be careful, but that's something that we
Williamsburg
want to discourage.
filed for bankruptcy recently.
Potentially, that could convert to all residential.
Wow.
I mean, it could be that it could convert to some degree of affordable housing, because I think that there's opportunities there. I mean, I think with our input, obviously, right? But I think
I'm sorry.
things could happen.
But I'm concerned about as far as the the IBZs outside the IBZs. Definitely, I think having affordable housing versus just a deserted hotel. Absolutely. So sorry. Thank you for bringing that up. But I'm more concerned about the conversions in the IBZs and in the conflicts.
Yeah, and it is legislative. It is a bill that's under consideration. Under the measure, hotels and offices can go residential if the owner agrees to set aside at least 20% of the apartments as affordable, or if the property is used as supportive housing through an agreement with the state or the city. And I know there was a hearing last week. I don't know where the train for the bill is.
Now,
Well,
can I make one?
All right. I think we're going to have to move on, because I know we have another item on the agenda. Yes, Katie. I can't hear you.
Just a quick recommendation that until we have the tools that we're looking for, which we might not have in this administration, that as a community board, we're very kind of hard-nosed about what we allow. So Acme, for example, it was a recommendation that they not have the full height. It could have been a contingency, perhaps. So it's just saying, moving forward, not giving away the whole bank, really asking for scale down, et cetera, et cetera. It's a way to put pressure on them, I hope, maybe, to have better tools, but also put pressure on the businesses to put pressure on the city, perhaps, to get better tools, because they know that they're not going to get the full envelope.
Okay, well, there's a recommendation now before the committee. Are you making a motion? Or is it just something you want us to think about?
I'd like us to, I don't even know if I can make a motion, but I'll make it, if somebody wants me to make a motion to say that, I didn't even anticipate doing that, but I'm just saying that I think that that's something that moving forward, we should have that priority, that vision.
Well, I think that with Acme, for instance, I think we work pretty hard at trying to hold them to certain things, like, for instance, making them promise that they would continue to use the space as for industry and the other various other conditions we put on them.
That height is so high. It's so high. It's little. It's higher than 25 Kent. I'm pretty sure.
Well,
Anyway,
I think this is something that the committee does need to discuss, and I don't know that we can come to a consensus on anything some specific enough to be a motion, but I think we can put it on the agenda for the next committee meeting.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's just to really think about it seriously, that we might have a little more power here than we realized.
I would recommend that at our next committee meeting, that we specifically discuss some of the tools that we've discussed tonight, and we talk about what kind of recommendations we want to make with respect to, let's say, parking, with respect to whether I think we need to think about this and come back, talk about the idea of the community facilities, and whether we want to start recommending that maybe look at different developments and different applications and see whether we feel that we want to ask the city to, or we want a condition that we not give a preference for a community facility in a particular application. But I think that we can come back and discuss these specific things.
I think all of that makes a lot of sense. Just to sort of chime in here, I'm going to do a little research because as a real estate broker, I kind of always got the sense that community facilities were just used as a bonus. So, they got preferential rent or, were sold for undervalue really for the rest of the project and are kind of just thrown in. So I'm going to see what I can find out about that. And I think also to a question I think you posited earlier, Del, about sort of our responsibility as, the land use committee is to look at our city and what we think is best for it. And I do think that now is the time. I think while we have elections going on and we have the ear of so many candidates to really figure out what it is that we think is best for our city and figure out a plan, idealistic or not, is really an opportunity and what we should be doing, because we're not acting on capitalism, we're acting for our city and for our community. So I'll do what I can to find out regarding the community facilities, but just wanted to kind of share that based on everything that's been said tonight.
Great. All right. Can we move on to the second item on the agenda? And let me please thank everyone tonight. And I would like to thank you, Leah and Stephen, and Richard Barrick, Alexis. Have I forgotten anyone else who's came here tonight to visit? We'll be asking you all to come back again.
We're happy to do it.
I hope that's. I think you are. I think that the time is ripe for us to really be proactive about working together on something.
Right on. We're super happy to do it. Thanks so much for having us, you guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Night. Bye, you guys.
Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night. So the next item is actually technically on the housing committee agenda, but we decided to have it as a joint meeting because it obviously affects zoning also. And so, Rabbi Niederman, did you want to take over on this discussion? Is the rabbi still here? If not, Maria Vieira would I think be the person to take over.
Sure. I think Rabbi is in the meeting. Perhaps we lost him.
No, I'm not. Let me look to
Okay,
see if
you?
I can.
Okay. So let's just move forward.
Okay.
Can you all hear me?
Okay. So,
Can you guys hear me? Because I'm not
yes.
hearing. Okay, great.
Your volume's a
Yes.
little low, but we hear
Yeah,
you.
so this is the matter of, actually was brought to the housing committee, and it's the matter of local law, and I'm sorry, because I have to look this way at my other screen. The matter of local, I wasn't ready to present. I thought Rabbi was going to be present. The matter of the local law that's slated to amend the New York City Charter in relation to requiring a racial equity disparity report for land use applications. So lots of sponsors on this bill at the City Council. Particularly notable is our Antonio Reynoso, Stephen Levin have signed on and are, it looks like spearheading alongside the public advocate and other members. But the purpose, it's a bill, and the bill requires a racial disparity report for certain land use applications of a minimum number of adjacent blocks or floor area. So, and I'm literally reading off the legislation. The report must include, but is not limited to, an analysis of demographic, social, economic, and housing conditions and trends, as well as identification of potential measures that may address any identified disparities or displacement risk. So I don't necessarily know what the report would entail. I suspect that there should be some boilerplate language that that committees are going to have to use, and boards specifically when meeting to discuss proposals from developers. But I do not know what that report looks like, or if it's something, I mean, I don't suspect that it's something that it's left to the community board's discretion. But if anyone knows more about this, this law, please, I mean, I'm sorry that Councilmember Levin wasn't able to join us. I haven't seen him join. And perhaps, I don't know if Alex stayed on, Rodriguez, no? Yeah, yeah. So I really can't, I mean, other than what we all know, which is this communication that we received, what does that look like for boards specifically? In submitting a report, or creating a report, or just adding information or adding value to the report. If anyone here wants to take this on or discuss it, or provide some feedback, I guess this is the time, and this is why we're meeting. I'm not the person who's the expert on the subject.
I could, say something. I think it would trigger sort of an extension of the environmental review that included the category of, racial impact. And in terms of what that looked like, I guess it would just, just require a study, demographic study of just, I guess, previous rezonings, and just look at the, the effect it had on retaining residents or resident, if there was a flight of residents. It just makes me think of a couple of years ago, city planning came to Greenpoint, and they basically provided an update on the 2005 and 2009 rezonings, but it was just on the areas that were rezoned. And what they found is that there was actually a small incremental increase in the Latino population in the district. But in parallel, Churches United did a study in South Williamsburg, and it showed there was double-digit percentage of displacement of Latino residents. So I just feel like the scope of the study, because I feel like when they do these impact statements, it's just like, I want to say it within half a mile of the site, that it really should be a district-wide or a neighborhood-wide study, because I don't know, like I said, we have conflicting reports essentially from the two studies. So,
So this is a report that we anticipate is going to be generated by city planning. Is that the case? And they're going to have to.
The developer has to do it.
I'm sorry?
I think the developer has to do it. Essentially, they go through, they do an environmental assessment, a review of what categories will return to be impacted by their land use change. And then city planning decides whether it's a severe negative impact. And if they issue a positive declaration, then they have to do an environmental impact statement. So, and I think what the law is saying, based on the scale of the rezoning, there's a certain threshold, I want to say it's like 50,000 square feet or something, that it automatically would trigger a racial impact study as part of the environmental review. And but I just worry about the scale and the scope of it, that it's too small under current conditions.
Just to correct, it wouldn't just be private applicants. It would mostly be Department of City Planning undertaken rezonings, because they generate the largest amount of potential unit increase, right? So it could happen on some private sector sites, but highly likely on city planning sites. The other thing with the two reports, city planning, though they show a growth in population, their denominator increases because you've added a lot of units. So therefore, proportionally, your ratio goes down, right? If you had no action, the amount of people that were Latino before, right, the percentage is going to go down when you're adding more units, even if they did well with the housing lottery, well enough that they offset the displacement that happened in other districts. So they may have been displaced heavily from certain districts, but whether it was the same people or different households that got the affordable units, it had a net increase of population, but it still decreased the ratio of population. So that's how the two reports kind of speak to each other. The other thing in terms of what be analyzed, the problem is going to be, it will probably be a subset of the socioeconomic section. And one of the areas that's been controversial is secondary displacement. And the methodology that it uses, it's until case law says otherwise, that's the methodology. But if the methodology maybe is not or can be, then if that's tied into the racial impact study, then that's not necessarily going to capture what people may find 5, 10, 15 years in the future. And then the other part is, by the market rate units that would be evaluated, what is going to be the basis of study to figure out who is moving in? That will be a little bit customized to the community districts. So even though the analysis will be the same citywide, who has been moving into the market rate units, and how do you document that to plug in the factor for the racial report?
Sorry, I have to take notes.
It's simply disclosure, right? So you have a disclosure. The board gets to think about it. And by the way, I'm sure the board thought about that issue of the 2004 and 2009 rezonings. Yeah, things are going to change, right? There was a big case made by folks from St. Nick's Alliance that used to come to the rezoning task force. Blanking on her name, she had the stroke, right? She was heavily involved in documentation.
Allison Cordero.
Exactly, right. So Allison did a lot of work. Pratt folks did a lot of work projecting how the census tracts were going to change. So even though it wasn't an official study, there was something valid in there to help formulate a recommendation. So to the extent the council paid attention to that or not, it certainly led in 2004, because adopted in 2005, to have voluntary inclusionary housing, right? So you could argue those studies did make a difference. The council, with David Yaski then and Marty Markowitz in his role in Borough Hall, argued to get voluntary affordable lease on the books, right? So, whether you need a racial impact study or whether you could kind of sense it, it's there for the council members to make a determination. And okay, they acknowledge, yes, racial impact study, but I believe the zoning still has merit. Then they could make the determination regardless of what they see the projection in the future. And again, the projection is not scientific. It's an artful attempt that may or may not be flawed. So it's disclosure information. It's like a traffic study in a way.
Mm-hmm. So I understand the purpose of this report. My question is, how does it speak to the functions of the committees or the land use committees at board level? So are we to start looking at these applications by developers through a racial equity lens and look at the reports as something that drives how we determine whether or not the developer is answering, proposing to address the issue of disproportionately displacing Black and Brown communities?
It's going to be one more piece of information for the board to look at for the applications that trigger it. And it could influence the board to say yes, no, or conditions. And it may justify a vote, but that's it. And if that's the reason to say, well, we're good anyhow, we know it's going to be a problem, but we think the application should go ahead, or this is exactly why we want to deny it, or to say, well, developer, you really should do more percentage of affordable despite what MIH says, or your MIH should be bigger bedrooms because that will give the people who might be displaced a better opportunity of getting those units. Or you might say, instead of MIH option one at 60% AMI, we need 40% because that gives better chance of people being displaced to secure units. That's how it will affect you.
Anyone have any questions? Del, you're muted. Can't hear you.
I know. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
So
now I can hear.
when in applying this test, what parameters are we to use? Is this something we're supposed to just invent, or will there be something given to us to be able to actually some concrete parameters to look at, some concrete things to look at rather than just to sit here and try to speculate?
They will come up with a standard, and based on that standard, they will just tell you what they believe will happen, and that's it.
What they believe will happen?
Who will come up with the standard? City planning?
It could be city planning staff. It could be the environmental review staff at city planning. I'm not sure, whether council conversation may help influence that. Case law could eventually influence it, meaning that somebody sues because they're not happy with the standards.
And then we will be free to look at that standard and question it.
You, sir, can. I'll give you an example with this secondary displacement. Rent stabilized buildings are not analyzed for the assumption that people living in rent stabilized are going to be displaced. However, that's not reality. Builders that have a lot of zoning rights, they'll knock down a rent stabilized building because the law lets them knock it down, right? So people get displaced, yet city planning doesn't require that for the study. So it depends on what people believe are quirks. Buildings that are where they have a government agreement where for a certain number of years they have to stay affordable, right? So the term is expiring units, right? So is the expiring units being studied properly in terms of people being displaced? So we already under standard socioeconomical secondary displacement. If you look at the borough president's scope comments, you'll see a bunch of things we think could be done better. But right now, until this case law, city planning is going to do them as they do them. And that concept is going to mix into this racial disparity in terms of figuring out what's going to dictate what's what's going to be the practice. So the practice will be figured out for you. And if you don't like it, well, that could affect your recommendation.
And do we have a sense of whether this bill looks like it's going to pass?
I have no idea. I have no intel on this. I know it feels good to be calling for this study. So it's possible it may get a nice groundswell to move ahead in some form.
Being sponsored by 25 members.
So if it's sponsored by 25, a key is where's the mayor on this? Because if the mayor's not in this, then they got to get a supermajority. I believe they can't just simply, I think they can't simply be +1, you know, for a veto.
Mm-hmm.
I understand the public advocate, this is he initiated the legislation, right?
Yeah. It seems like, well, it's a bill, it's been introduced. It's a matter of waiting. It's been almost a year that it's on the agenda. It's coming to us now. I'm wondering if they believe that this is going to become legislature and they're just notifying us. Well, not just, but they're notifying us because this is something that is anticipated to go through. And which is still really very up in the air because it doesn't really give us any direction into how we're supposed to behave moving forward. Once it does, if it becomes legislature, what's expected of us. But as you said, city planning is going to provide some boilerplate language or
standards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Consider it something you could pay attention to or ignore. It's really up to you.
Yeah.
How much, when you're voting on a land use item, how much you want to pay attention to information.
Well, you should be paying attention.
Well, like just the same when transportation studies are done as part of things the board reviews. It's one of the things the board can choose to deliberate or not.
Well, true. How many times have we looked at the transportation studies and said, come on, this is nonsense. When did you do this study? 50 years ago on a Sunday afternoon, and we've just, and so we've done that. I mean, let's say that the city does the study and they decide there's no problem here, but we have some sense among ourselves that, you know what, we think this is a problem. We don't think they're really taking into consideration the potential displacement that this is going to cause. I think that's what you're saying, Richard, then we can say, you know what? We can say we don't like it because we feel that that too many people will be displaced.
There's also one other avenue. When they're doing an environmental impact statement, they have the scoping hearings. So
Yeah.
they have to explain what they're going to study to figure it out. So like on secondary displacement, you know, borough president consistently comments on the flaws that we believe, at least. So on what tasks they're going to undertake for the racial study, those are the type of things you could just say, well, you really have to do it a little differently in our district or whatever. So you do get a chance to comment at the scope hearing to suggest ways to make the study the best it can be. So it's not taking a position on something, it's just the analysis. This is trying to get the analysis right. So the board has a role at the scoping session.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's great.
Marty, you're muted. Are you Marty Needleman?
In the chat, it says Julia was typing Rabbi is on the phone. He's having mic issues also. Our mics are not working. Marty's trying to speak also. I don't know, maybe if they have the ability to just write in the chat their questions. I don't know.
Marty, can you type in your question if it's a question, or maybe it was just providing feedback or adding. If it's feedback, it could be lengthy.
Could you call someone and someone could pipe in their phone?
I see this in the chat, but I don't see any follow-up.
Well, Julia, you're the spokesperson.
Looks like Marty.
Oh, Marty, go ahead.
All right, I have Marty Needleman on the phone. Go ahead, Marty.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that previously when we had discussions about the rezonings, that the issue about racial impact, it isn't just what the prospective impact is, it's also to what extent does this rezoning or these changes going to affirmatively impact on correcting the situation. Community Board 1 remains less than 5% African American, while right at the border, Flushing Avenue, on the other side, it's like 75% black. So it's just a lot of craziness. But I think that's some of the stuff that we have to address that is forgotten about in these issues. And I think it's been mentioned that part of the environmental impact is to evaluate the racial impacts, not just historic, but also prospective. But how is this affirmatively going to address some of the problems that we have along these lines?
Marty, I'm sure that whatever you said was extremely valuable, but we weren't able to understand. It was unintelligible. I mean, there was like an echo of sorts. Something was happening. Is there something wrong with the Cisco? How untimely. Talking about inequities. I had to say it, Will. I had to say it. Will is shaking his head. I mean, I don't know. What does this mean for us? What does
Well,
I mean? We have
Julia typed something in the chat. Says the families of Williamsburg House are very worried about displacement with new privatized Section 8 program in 10 years, where they will be and how more of our people are being moved out.
That's the biggest problem. I mean, NYCHA is a whole other beast, you know? But I think the biggest worry that folks have is the continued displacement and not just the continued, but exacerbation of what has already occurred, that it has been detrimental to those people that have been displaced. And what is the outlook? What is the forecast if it continues happening? I mean, the folks that are left, many of whom are protected, have stayed because they've been protected by rent stabilization laws and because they're long-term residents and because of those AMIs that have spoken to the ability of lower income folks to stay around. And let's be real, when we're talking about displacement of people of color, these are the people you're talking about. Other populations have been displaced, but it's predominantly, brown folk, black folk. And when you continue to raise, and I get it, I understand, we all understand, this is why we're in this together. We want to, people say affordable to whom? Because sometimes those AMIs are extremely low and don't speak to people's, to kind of middle income folk that are left behind. But what continues to happen is that those that just don't have the ability or that cannot sustain what is happening, because it's not just being able to stay in an affordable unit, it's what happens around you, the entire infrastructure, how it's impacted, where, commercial businesses, stores, everything, it's just not affordable to those few people that are able to remain stably housed in those units. So it's looking at, developments, it's looking at those requests with that lens, through the lens of how is this impacting those people that are continuing to be displaced, regardless of the fact that we're 20% a lower AMI, but mostly a higher AMI. And then you have the market rate developments that are coming in, and you're talking about commercial areas or commercial districts that are building residential, but are they building residential for people of color or lower income folk? Almost the same. It's parallel. And Richard Barrick said it very well. It just depends on what you do with it. Once you get that report and once you have that information, what do you do with it as a board when you're speaking, when you're meeting with developers that are coming to request variances? What are you asking for to kind of address those issues? And can we? And it's an advisory situation, hours, and then it goes on to another level. If it manages to escalate and get to the city council level, what happens there? Are they going to put a stop to certain things because they're going to enforce? It's really good to have a report, but what is the use of the report? What is the purpose at the end of the day? Are you going to take action based on those things that come of that report?
So I just want to make 2 points. One is, when you have an upzoning, right, you have an MIH option. Is the MIH option capturing the best incomes for your board? Sometimes less is more, right? So you have a choice of 40, 60, 80, and 115 average income. And so is adjusting the MIH to something different and proposed by the developer the right course to address racial impact study? Maybe you need to get the deeper AMI. Maybe you need, in this case, you need a higher AMI. The other thing is, where we still have city-owned property, that how do you use the city-owned property to make up the difference to try to capture the people who might be displaced otherwise? How do you get to have those sites be an opportunity? One of the victories your board had was from Greenpoint Williamsburg, was people who were displaced from the board still counted for local preference. Will that still apply to future sites such as Greenpoint Hospital, right? The sites by the Broadway Triangle. Is that something the board wants to capture? So how do you say, well, if we allow these racial impacting market rate developments, how do we compensate them on city-owned sites? Is a possible answer, because then the city may need to do deeper subsidies to capture the AMIs you need on those other sites. So that may be a way of spinning it as well.
Thank you.
Marty, well, Julie had another comment. What happens if they should move out and the apartment will become a higher AMI? And then Marty wrote, not just displacement, but what affirmative steps are being taken to remedy existing shocking racial percentages, but definitely bringing attention via these reports to alert the world about the crazy reality we're living in.
Thank you, Marty. So is that the case? Will they become a higher AMI if a tenant moves out, or will that unit remain lower income?
So there's two type of units. There are the units based on MIH and voluntary. Those are permanently affordable. So basically their increases are rent guidelines board increases for the most part. So when the last person moves out, it's still a rent guidelines board, right? So you're good. The other issue is the ones that are simply tied to now called Affordable New York. When the tax break goes away and the last income restricted person moves out, we've lost that unit. Then you have expiring Section 8 units and other type of units. ANHD has really good maps that document that. When those units lose the affordability requirement, once the last tenant that lived there prior to the expiration moves out, it's a market rate unit. So you have a slow hemorrhage of units in that building.
Thank you. Any other thoughts? For those that have the ability to speak,
I'll
you're
also
not
add,
muted.
you have some home ownership units that went as affordable housing, but their resale restrictions are not that great. So in the long term, somebody could make a killing if they live there at the right time, given the market conditions. You have a lot of affordable units that the second that household sells, it's a market rate unit.
Yeah. Fortunately.
I would just say, Maria, your question, I think, is so poignant about, say we have this report and it shows potential for negative impact, then what? And I think it's leverage to get, deeper AMI, higher volume of units. Because with MIH, those percentages, 25, 75, et cetera, 2080, whatever they are, that's the floor, that's the bare minimum. I mean, they could put more affordable units in there. Would they, but I feel it's a leveraging mechanism. But I don't, in the end of the day, it'll send a message, but will it actually stick,
Yep, exactly. You don't want the message. I mean, the message will get there, but what will the message achieve? That's the question.
Well, I guess it depends. Then that depends on whether the city will and whether our electeds will listen to us, and how important it is to them to make this a real bill and something real, rather than just something that they can, make it look like they're doing something, make it sound good.
Type of recommendations could be expense budget funding into anti-displacement strategies above and beyond what the city's already doing.
Right.
Supporting groups like Marty's or your other locally based affordable housing nonprofits that do tenant assistance work. So those are other things that are potential mitigation messages the board could put forth.
Right. I mean, we had a number of the nonprofits have band together for MAD, Mobilization Against Displacement, and they were funded. And, then ultimately they lost the funding. And this is a really strong effort among almost all of the nonprofits in the North Side and the South Side to try to get together to sponsor bills and to try to work with people who are being displaced to try to help them out and to fight displacement. but they need funding too. It's people, nonprofits still have to pay their staff.
Is there anything out from NHD that we could maybe take a look at on this?
There was a report. I think it's called The Right to a Roof. I don't recall though. Well, I shouldn't say I don't recall. I really do not know whether or not this was language that was, or any language that, there is language that speaks to disparity and equity, but I don't know if it's aligned with this introduction.
It was just a thought, maybe if we could, the more information.
It's probably on their website.
So are we gonna make a recommendation, like discuss it further at the next meeting? Is this going back on the agenda? So what do we do?
I think it was just really meant to be a presentation for the two committees to examine and discuss, and whether there's going to be a recommendation, I don't know.
There's no request. It was information that
Yeah.
was distributed to community boards and for the boards to consider and talk about, learn. I wouldn't say ideate, but I don't know, ideate on what we're doing now. Just learning. We don't know much. This is all we know.
Well, could also potentially pass on our concerns to the public advocate and the council, saying, we're worried about what, the actual report will look like and what the impact it'll have. And, we really need to give it some true power. Or we just continue talking about it.
Yeah, so there it is called Right to a Roof. I was right about that. Karen, demands for an integrated housing plan to end homelessness and promote racial equity.
I just feel like if we have this, information, and if there is anything, like Steve said, that we can, add to, recommend, to the public advocate or whomever.
What I'm not very sure of is what is the ask of us right now.
I don't think there is an ask.
I don't think there is.
We were just being asked we were being told, I think, that this is coming down the pike, perhaps, and to give us the information so that we can discuss it and know that this is something that we may be dealing with in the future. And then, of course, to give us a chance to, as Steve said, raise any concerns that we might want to pass on to the public advocate.
Something else, even though you don't really have a residential rezoning on the horizon, except for probably, hopefully, the Greenpoint Hospital property. I don't know of any private sector rezonings popping up, but
River
like
Street.
updating your platform in terms of like what you did back in 2004, the recommendations which led to the establishment of the anti-displacement zone. But there are the idea of, like, for example, some of the funding that came out, like with the housing court. I don't know that your board qualifies for that yet. You may want to look at the recommendations we did, even though it was Industry City. We put a lot of stuff in there in terms of residential displacement pressure ideas. So you may want to look at that and see, are those good policies that the board would want to adopt when you have the next opportunity to comment on a residential rezoning. So in advance of having racial equity reports to be part of a formal process, you may want to think more about city-owned properties that you can try to leverage. Broadway Triangle's sites are going to move forward. Hopefully, right, the hospital moves forward. Where else do you have city-owned property in the pipeline to create sites that might address racial equity? I could tell you in the borough president's housing report, and I'm going to give Diana Rayner a plug on this one because it was the first idea. Your bus terminal in Williamsburg Plaza, we put out the idea of, hey, can we put a deck over the buses and create a housing site, which, be affordable housing site? Are there libraries, childcare centers, whatever, that are low rise that, gosh, if we use them more for development, we could do more affordable housing and therefore try to address racial equity. So those are things you could certainly consider in the interim.
So leveraging city-owned sites. Well, you trying to leverage city-owned sites.
Correct, right? So, the more affordable housing in the pipeline you could have, the better you could try to counterbalance things that are happening in the market that may modify racial equity and economic equity too.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Richard.
Thank you, Erin, for sharing the ANHD report.
Yeah, I was actually just going to follow up on one thing that Richard said. So he mentioned the zip codes for the universal access for the attorneys in housing court. So during the time of COVID, the HRAs lifted the zip code restrictions. So they will provide counsel to cases that are moving forward. And then that program is supposed to be a full implementation for all zip codes by FY22, I believe. So we're sort of like at that runway where the zip codes they don't matter currently because of COVID. And all things considered, I don't believe we're going to go back to a zip code implementation, but just wanted to clarify.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
I mean, I don't know how folks feel about that, but that's a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, the one the one issue that some of the nonprofits have taken with it is that as they've implemented the right to counsel side of the program, the anti-harassment work has gotten defunded to fund the legal counsel. So a recommendation of the board could be moving forward, to continue to include that anti-harassment funding, not just the legal services funding.
I hope this meeting is being recorded because I am the worst note taker.
I believe it is.
Transparent.
I believe it is. Just to let you know, we have one more item on the agenda, and that has to do with landmarks.
So I think that should wrap it up for the housing committee. Would you all agree?
I guess so.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for the feedback.
Good night, housing committee.
And Richard, thank you for the
Thank you, Richard, so much.
All right, so I don't think you need me for landmarks. I could sign off then?
Yes.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Have a great night,
Good night.
Richard. Thank you.
So, Trina, I think you might want to just mention that you've been, how you've been in touch with landmarks and what we can do moving forward to get more information from the landmarks people.
And I had invited them to come to one of our land use meetings, and they said what they would prefer and what they do with community boards is they have their own Zoom meeting that they invite community board members to, where they kind of go through the process of what's expected from the community board, and then there's time for question and answer, which I think would be really great for us at this point, because I think we've had we've come down on certain issues, and the landmarks committee has ruled in a completely different way. And so I think it'd be good to understand kind of how they look at things, and maybe we want to continue to judge the way we do, but it'd be good to understand why they rule against us so often. And what they suggested is to hold the meeting the week of the 15th. And so I looked at the community board calendar, and there on the week of the 15th, there are meetings on the 15th and the 17th, which are Monday and Wednesday. I can't remember which committees they are, but they're committee meetings. And so that leaves Tuesday the 16th or Thursday the 18th. And so can we as a committee choose one of those days, one of those evenings? They said it'll be, I can't remember, 6 or 6:30, but they would send out a Zoom link. And one thing I asked is whether it could be open to residents in the historic district, and they said no, that it's really tailored for community board members. And so they said that they have a separate program for community people, but this is for community board members. And so it would just be us, and we can also invite the whole board, but just with the understanding that it's just board. So do we, I don't have a personal preference for Tuesday the 16th or Thursday the 18th.
I can only make the 16th, can't make the 18th.
Okay, so does anyone else have?
I'm the opposite of Steve.
Excuse me, but the 16th is the Women's Issues Committee. You're talking
Maybe I have,
March, right?
You know, Marie, can you look at, maybe I looked at the calendar wrong, or maybe there's something more on it. The week of the 15th, which days are open?
Well, right now I see the 18th is the only date.
Oh, okay, so that 16th must have filled in. So I guess if the 18th is the only day, should we go for it?
Go for it.
Sure.
Maybe we can record it, Steve. Okay, so I'll go back to them and I'll have them issue an invitation, which Marie you can send to the whole board with an explanation of what it is. But it's basically a set, I think, a presentation that they do, and then there'll be plenty of time for questions and answers afterwards. And one of the questions I have is, when we looked at that 1118 Lorimer Street, as a board, we were looking at it from a preservation eye, and looking at the original and thinking that the design was too contemporary, or as Sante described it, as too almost Scandinavian, and just didn't seem appropriate. And both Sante and I listened to the whole hearing about it, and not one of the commissioners had a problem with the design as a contemporary design. They all thought it was a great intervention. And so I think that'll be. The other thing that happened is in the chairperson, halfway through, I guess the different commissioners talking about it, was asked how the community board voted, and she said the community board was for it, and which Sante this morning or last night sent the tape where she said that. And then Marie nicely sent me our recommendation again, and I sent both our recommendation and the tape where Sante said where the minutes were, where she said that, back to them to ask for an explanation. I don't think in the end it matters, because our argument, everything they talked about had nothing to do with the way we were looking at it. But I think it's really wrong and should be addressed.
I spoke to Landmarks today.
Oh, good. Okay.
And they said that the commissioners all had our letter and our position, and perhaps the person who made that statement misspoke, and that's what they were going to check into. But they did have our position from the commissioners, all the commissioners, and all the lead people.
Right. But I think it'd be good to have a conversation to get a better understanding on how they look at these, and to talk about things like whether hardship for residents. Della, you brought up that point.
Yes.
But I think that we can table it all till we're in the room with them, in the Zoom room on the 18th.
I think it's important, and especially since many of the newer members on our committee have had concerns about not really having a historical sense of what landmarks is looking for and looking at. So what do we know what time they would
I think it's
do
either
this?
6 or 6:30. I can firm it up tomorrow with them, and we can get it out to the board soon, or to the committee, and then
All
I
right.
get to the full board soon.
Can I
So
add something, Trina, to what you were
Sure.
saying? No, I believe something important, because I agree what you say, that would be very valuable. And I gave a testimony last time. That's why I was shocked when, one of the staff mentioned that, we gave recommendation. But I believe something changed, especially for commercial, for who doesn't know. They changed some of the regulation, and they gave a little bit more of freedom, and we spoke about how do you approach, because it's very subjective. Just be aware also, some of the commissioner at LPC, they're not all architects. Some, they do something else in their life, so they may not necessarily, they're even not preservationists. I believe the input we have given in these last two, one was Milton Street, we brought some positive changes. Maybe it wasn't entire that, but we gave some input, some direction, like the window at the front, the stucco at the back. But the one on Lorimer, 118 on Lorimer, definitely, it was acceptable, but they already presented it differently than what they present us.
That's
For
true.
example, we introduced the double entrances. They changed. There was a sort of kind of resemblance of the projecting. They changed slight bit how the frame was presented. So the infill, we gave input to modify the infill, so the layout, it was similar. What I still don't agree, at those pillars, they were completely unrelated in our district. And somehow, I don't know, maybe they didn't look at that accurately. And then other input we gave, it was about that the storefront needs to be painted, because historically they were never painted.
That's true.
And everybody, so I believe somebody would say we're being purist. We weren't really purist, because we were open to some kind of projection there. But we gave input that made the change. I believe our job may be a little bit more historic, and leave to the commission to make that decision.
Right.
That's all.
Okay.
So thank you.
I have a question. Who was it who said during the hearing that it was approved by the board?
I thought it was the chairperson. Sante, was it not the chair?
No, I believe is one of the staff normally read that. So he says, but they said it also at the end that there was.
Okay, so I think, I don't know if it's appropriate for the board to write a formal letter saying that we'd like a rehearing because it was mischaracterized.
Katie, I think that it's not. I think that I think that it was kind of an after question, asking how the community board voted. It wasn't that was going to sway, because not one of the people had the problems we had with the design.
I have to say, one of the commissioner, which is an architect, and normally is one of the contextualists there, he mentioned, he said it could have been looked both way, but because everybody had commented, he said, well, maybe I can accept it. I'm assuming something was missed, Trina. He was really looking in context, understanding the district, and the image that you put in, they receive it in black and white. It was a Xerox copy. There's so many other ingredients there that probably didn't favor, and it wasn't the rainbow room where everybody I saw in the past discussing a little detail of a carpet, of a rag, and that sometimes happened.
I don't know, it just seems like there's just a huge divide between what we perceived and what their mindset. It's just kind of shocking that the entire commission, all the members basically thought it was okay. It was just basically let it all slide, and thought we were being purists, and they're the supposed professionals, really amazing.
I mean, I think it's interesting because I had reached out to Trina and got, I don't remember exactly what you sent me, but was trying to learn as a new member of the committee what we're looking to do. Because, at first glance, I thought, oh, nice renovation of the building. Like, what is everyone's problem with this? And that's why I wanted to be a little bit more informed before responding to it. And when you read through I think the guide of what a historical, area is, it's to do your very best to, maintain the building in the way that it was based on the historical pictures. And when you do that and you look at it through that lens, then, you wouldn't blow out the, front of the building and make it floor to ceiling glass, so I think it's a question really of what it is that they're looking to do. And I think our group followed the philosophy of, a landmark area.
Also important to understand, really last comment, I want to take other time from other. This change about the redesign of the storefront, and in this case, they accepted it was beyond repair. Everything was not there. I thought some of the doors were there. The more I look at it again, but probably the commission didn't have the time to do that. But they changed the rules, especially for the commercial storefront. And there have been some forces there, even within the commission, that they have, commercial storefront very variable, so that's one of the elements. And the residential, the private owner of the house, of course, have to comply fully, even a little brick mold for a window needs to be maintained. So those are the changes. And by years ago, they would not accept it that way.
I just feel that in the last couple of years, in general, they've gotten less stringent. I could be wrong, and we can talk to them about that when we meet with them.
Okay, so I'll confirm the 18th, and then I'll send the information. Marie, I guess it'll be a Zoom invitation from LPC that I should. Marie, maybe I'll call you tomorrow and we can talk about what the proper protocol is for getting it from them, if that's okay.
What's the time? Do you know the time, Trina? 18?
It was either 6 or 6:30. It's the evening.
Do you know who you were speaking with?
Yeah, I was speaking to Rich Stein.
Okay.
It's him and then a guy named Anthony something. It's they're the intergovernmental affairs staff.
Because I think it's great that they'll meet with us. The staff has changed greatly over there, so
yeah, it's
they'll be
definitely
different than the people who came the last time to do something similar. They worked with us. We had 2 or 3 sessions with them in the past.
Oh, that was a long time ago. That was before my time.
Right, that's what I'm saying. It was like that was the last we had that type of dialogue.
Well, it's good. It's time for another one.
The other thing, the point I wanted to bring up, do you remember Fillmore Place and that section?
Yeah.
When there was I don't know if they've advanced the plan, but they were putting what we considered to be an inappropriate plan because it was all glass and modern building.
Yep.
And Landmark said it doesn't matter.
Right.
They overrode that the contextual feelings.
Marie, I think that was in part due to the fact that the building had been completely knocked down, and they said they had a different standard. They were much looser. Their standard was much more flexible when a building had been completely knocked down and then something brand new was being built.
Also, Jamie, I feel as a community board, a lot of people are not professional, they're not architects, they're not preservationists. It's a big responsibility, for people just to express freely making subjective comment and push for subjective decision, and then we're going to lose entirely any historic fabric or any historic sense,
Okay, so look out for the invitation for the 18th, Thursday, the 18th.
All right, so I think that's it. I think that we can say goodnight. at this point.
Del, before, I'm sorry. This is not gonna take longer than a minute. Just want to reiterate that the issue of the local law, the introduction, is not a housing committee issue. It is a land use matter. And it should be handled moving forward. If anything becomes of it, it should be handled by land use, not public housing.
Well,
Can we agree?
you know, Marie, this is, I think you need to talk to the
I'm making a
chair.
public statement. I'm making a public statement and perhaps
Okay.
even a request in public. This is a matter that has to be handled by land use, not public housing per se. I mean, public housing, they can join, but this is a land use matter. It's about applications that speak to variances. Just putting it out there. I see the blank faces.
This is, you know, I was directed in no uncertain terms that this was not to be put on my agenda by the chair.
Okay.
So I think you need to bring it up with her.
I definitely will. Thank you very much. Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Really good meeting.
Love
Okay.
the hand. Good night. Night.
That's Sante playing with his thingies.
I
know, it's funny.
Karen, you were great. Thank you. Everybody was great.
Yes,
Thank you.
Karen,
Good
great.
night. Good night.